When we started this podcast, the Resilient Podcast, the focus and the purpose was to interview leaders. And when I'm talking about leaders, I'm talking about senior executives, CEOs, board members, government officials, and hopefully one day folks outside of the business world. But it is to hear their stories, their authentic stories on crisis, risks, and disruption and how they were resilient. And we've talked to some incredible leaders to date. If you haven't had a chance to check out some of the previous episodes, go do so. There are some great discussions that we've had. And I think everybody knows that I'm from Deloitte. And today, I'm continuing a conversation with Barry Salzberg, who is the former CEO of Deloitte US and the former global CEO of Deloitte US. And we had a great conversation in our first episode, which focused on how Barry led through the downturn in the mid-2000s, taking some significant risks, doing things like building Deloitte University, a physical learning center, or making an acquisition of another consulting organization, Bearing Point. And today we're continuing that conversation and we're focusing Barry's perspectives on leadership. And listen, if there's somebody that's got perspectives on leadership, it is Barry with his CEO tenure. And then now he's a professor at Columbia University.
It's my responsibility to demonstrate the trustworthiness. And if I can demonstrate the trustworthiness by being open, honest, transparent, vulnerable, I perform, I respect you, all the things that would cause you to want to trust me, then I think I can be trusted. That to me is the foundation of our future interactions and our ability to get things done, for me to lead, for you to follow, for you to have ideas, for me to adopt them. It's the oxygen of the organization.
Live from Manhattan in New York City at the iconic 30 Rock building, welcome to Resilient, where we hear stories from leaders on risk, crisis, and disruption. And we get those stories by meeting our guests on their home turf. My name is Mike Kearney, the leader of Deloitte Strategic Risk Practice. So Barry, I've got a lot of questions on leadership. And as I talked about when we opened this up, that's one of the things that I've always been impressed by with you. But I love in these podcasts learning a bit about the person. Where'd you grow up?
So I am a Brooklyn, New Yorker, born and raised. And I lived in Brooklyn in multiple communities, from Brownsville to East Flatbush to Canarsie. Married my wife, remained in Brooklyn for a bit. Then we moved to Staten Island. And then ultimately now our home is in New Jersey.
My father-in-law was born in Brooklyn, so I'm going to need to ask him if any of those locations, and the age is probably similar. So
yeah, well,
maybe you guys ran
together.
Locations
Locations were pretty tough locations at the time, and I think in many ways contributed to who I am as a professional, as an individual. And they often use the phrase, I don't know if you've heard this, Mike, you can take the person out of Brooklyn, but you can't take the Brooklyn out of the person.
I've heard that, yeah. That's true with my father-in-law. I totally want to explore, but I think maybe for another time. But I'm really intrigued by, folks like my dad was a San Francisco cop. We didn't have a lot, but a lot of times those conditions, I think, are conducive to people excelling in the future.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at my my family background, my dad was a postal worker, and because it wasn't enough to really make ends meet, he worked another full-time job. So he had two shifts. So
wow.
He would work during the day on the docks and be a sort of a dock worker, and at night he was a postal worker, and we barely had, anything. We didn't own a home. It was an apartment always. Mm-hmm. Never owned a car, and essentially never went on vacation. For us, vacation was a train ride to Coney Island, have a day at the beach, and hot dogs at Nathan's at night. That's really what we did, and I'm very, family conscious and love and believe in family, and so I never look back on those days in a negative way.
Right.
Those humble beginnings clearly were instrumental in helping define, what I wanted to do with my life and how I was going to go about it.
So who were some of your heroes when you were growing up?
I was a sports fanatic when I was younger. I've lost that interest in later years, but Sandy Koufax was one of my
I was
my
in the
idols.
Dodgers were out here then.
Yeah. And I really loved football, and I was a Miami Dolphin fan, as oddly as that may seem. And so I looked up to the various sports figures that were part of the teams that I loved. Business was not in my vocabulary at all, really, because it wasn't in the background of my family.
Sure.
And so I didn't have business leaders to look up to. My grandparents were pretty much all gone by that time. I did not, until I met my wife, really have close personal guidance as to where I should be focusing my future on. But my wife and her parents, who suffered deeply in the Holocaust, were able to sort of encourage me to go to college and encourage me to find a career that I could excel at. In the absence of that kind of pushing and that kind of steering, I probably would not have gone to college and probably have gotten a job to make ends meet.
That is a great story. I was going to ask you, and that you may have just answered it, but were there any early experiences that really shaped you who you are today? Sounds like that obviously is one of them. Any others that you'd point to?
Yeah, that's clearly one of them. If you think about the neighborhoods that I talked about where we lived,
yep.
I was the minority in virtually every one of those areas. And so for me, how I was brought up in the environment that I was brought up with, diversity was a big part of it. And so there's no question that contributed to my commitment to and my driving of diversity as a firm-wide focus.
Barry, what about, so given the fact that business wasn't even necessarily in your future, and I may be fast-forwarding many years, when did you ultimately say, gosh, I'd like to be a CEO of a firm like Deloitte?
So, great question, and the answer is going to shock you. I was elected as the managing partner of Deloitte in 2003, and I was elected as the CEO of Deloitte in 2007. And I would say somewhere between 2005 and 2007, I developed an interest to become CEO.
Interesting.
So I'd never...
It was never one of those aspirations.
Never one of those aspirations. It was certainly not an aspiration before I joined Deloitte. And when I joined Deloitte, which was in 1977, my interest was very clear. And that was in making a decent living, serving as a professional advisor in the tax area. That was all that I wanted to do, and it was okay with me if I did that for my entire working career. It wasn't until I was tapped to move into some leadership role that I looked at that part of what I was doing and concluded that I enjoyed it,
yep.
and was viewed by others as doing it well.
It's interesting, and I always talk to younger staff about this, about how do you plan your career. And I always try to kind of keep it in the middle, which is letting it organically happen, which I actually think in some ways is a better way of doing it, and being almost way too intentional, because sometimes you do things that, don't lead you down the right path.
I think, I do that now today almost daily.
Yep.
So with my role at Columbia Business School and as part of the Executive in Residence program, I am meeting with students every day to talk specifically about their careers, about challenges of leadership, what's in front of them, and so forth. And this topic comes up all the time. And I'm where you are, Mike. I don't think it's a good idea to be overly aggressive and driven. I'm going to be CEO, and I'm going to be CEO and pound the table. not what I would say on the one hand is a good idea. And on the other hand, I don't think that what I did was a good idea either.
Sure.
On hindsight, just kind of going
Let it go.
along and letting it go. Whatever happens, kind of happens. Somewhere in the middle.
I got to ask you this question, and I wasn't going to go here now, but I'm going to because you brought it up. I think one of the things that I've always been impressed by is the fact that you spend time with people almost irrespective of their level. And I'm going to tell a real quick story.
Yeah.
I wasn't even going to go here. I remember it was probably about 15 months ago, and I was sitting down with the manager that supports me, my MDP. And I said, you know what? One thing I love about Barry is that he's unbelievably responsive and will spend time. So I sent you an email. I don't know if you remember this. And I said, Barry, I know you're leaving. You're going to be retiring in 6 months. And you responded. And I was joking with her. I said, he's so responsive. I'll bet you he'll respond within 5 minutes. And it was 3 minutes. And then you met with me for a full hour in your last 6 months. Can you explain, obviously people and mentorship is so important to you, but why is it so important to you? And how do you make that big of a commitment given all of the other things that you had going on and have going on now?
I do remember that, actually, and I appreciate your remembering it, and that probably will cause me to do more going forward because it's that kind of reaction that inspires me.
Yeah.
I really do feel that I've had a privileged career, lots of different experiences and opportunities, and I really do want to pay it back in whatever way I can. And my view of that is through mentorship and sponsorship, being available to counsel and advise when people want it. I don't push myself on anyone, but if people feel that they can get valuable advice and counsel or input on their careers or whatever the case may be, I love to do it. And why do I love to do it? One is because I feel like I'm giving back.
Sure.
Two, I feel like I'm making an impact that matters on people and people's lives. I do believe that we need, better, more sophisticated, but more sensitively created business leaders in the future. And if I could contribute to that in a way based upon my experiences and thinking, it's inspiring. I remember doing a college summit because, I'm involved with College Summit session with some young high school students, and people would say to me, Barry, what are you kind of
Why are you spending your
for?
time there, right? Yeah.
And I would say, well, apart from the fact that I could help them, and I believe that if I can help them, that's a really good thing. It makes me feel real good. It's incredibly inspiring and inspires me to do more. And I just feel that the energy that's created by people who receive that feedback and do something with it, and it's just an incredible feeling. And so I intentionally went into teaching, after I retired, not just to teach and impart years and years of experiences and learnings, but to be able to counsel and mentor people. So it's just something that I love. I love doing it because it's inspiring, and I know it makes an impact.
It does.
Now, in terms of the time,
Yeah.
I give you two analogies. Analogy one is there's always room for Jell-O. And I always say that because, in the dessert arena, the advertisement for Jell-O, there's always room for Jell-O, no matter how full you are. and why? Because Jell-O was tasty and it was delicious and it didn't consume much when you ate it. And I kind of look at mentoring and meeting with people and giving access to people like having Jell-O.
Oh my! That is going to be I send out a weekly email to my practice. That is going to be my subject in the next. There's always time for Jell-O.
Let me give you the second one because the second one to me is one that my wife and I talk about a lot because our older son now has a daughter of 2 months, and we start talking about friends that have children who have a second child, and the issue that typically comes about when you have the second child, the first child being jealous or worrying whether or not the parents will love them as much as they did before because now there's somebody else to love. And there was a Sesame Street skit where a similar event happened to Big Bird, and the takeaway from that experience was that when you have a second child, you don't share the love, you make new love.
Right.
And you're able to give as much love to each than what you were able to do when you had one.
Yep.
And that was the thinking. And that's my analogy here, too. No matter how busy I am, I'll just make more love. I really do think that matters. And I appreciate when people seek me out, and I appreciate when people tell me how they've taken the advice that I provided to them and implemented it and how they are doing. And I know that I'm having an impact because there's so many people that I've helped counsel and advise that come back to me time and time again for follow-up and what do you think, and just even sometimes how are you doing, from people that wouldn't do it, but I know that the reason that they're sending me that note is to remain connected and they're appreciative of what we've
I almost just
together.
want to recognize you because there are so many, I'm not going to list off the names, but so many people that you don't even know that I know that have said, gosh, you know what, I had reached out to Bear. And I'm talking about like managers, and not that you wouldn't connect with them, but folks that maybe you wouldn't see the CEO spending a lot of time with. So I recognize you for that.
Mike,
for that.
I'll conclude with this on this point, on this little story. Just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I received an email from an administrative staff at 30 Rock that works for Deloitte in a true support function. This is not an admin secretary type, but someone in infrastructure.
Sure.
That felt very comfortable reaching out to me in retirement to ask for counsel about a new opportunity.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
And so I'm not surprised by what you said. I'm humbled by it, and I feel good about it.
So talk about what type of leader were you? What were the values that drove kind of your decision-making, who you were?
So it's interesting question because as part of my class at Columbia, the very first session that we do is on values. Because if you want to learn, the course is about being a CEO and how CEOs process things and get things done in the company. And I start off by saying if you really want to be an effective leader, you have to really understand who you are, what your values are, so that when you do things, you can appreciate why you do things. Because we all do whatever we do because we are who we are.
Sure.
And so recently, in preparation for that class, I created my own values hierarchy. So I know.
So this is an easy question.
It is, but it isn't, because it's hard to talk about it. But I have 3 categories of values, and I don't want to get into the very, very specifics, but one is in the area of ethical leadership and integrity and everything that goes along with doing the right thing. And so there's a lot of forks in that values tree, but in essence, it's committing to being ethical and honest and integrity and so forth. The second arm of my values tree is about respect. And that has a lot of arms to it as well. And respect, as I've defined it, is both respecting me and me respecting others. Yep. A good example of what's in the respect hierarchy is preparedness and timeliness. These are 2 things that are important values of mine. And I jokingly tell the class this so that they could understand how to create a values tree, that both of these are important. So proper planning prevents poor performance, which I've been known to say time and time again. Defines the preparedness value. I really do think that you need to be prepared and be in the moment for people, because if you're not, I think that interaction goes south pretty quickly.
Sure.
And on the other hand, I think that timeliness is incredibly important. Being, if an assignment is due on Monday at midnight, I expect it to be in at Monday at midnight. And I think that's a sign of respect. It's more than anything, to me, a sign of respect. And so I use timeliness, whether it's coming to class, whether it's submitting an assignment, et cetera. And then I say you inevitably have trade-offs. And I tell everyone that I would rather be at a meeting on time and be 95% prepared than being 100% prepared and being late.
Right.
And so I say every time that you set a set of values, know who you are, know which one is important to you, because there will be trade-offs and conflicts. So that's the respect column, and then there's a whole bunch more that goes into respect. Sure. And then the third value is about broad category of generosity, caring for others, making oneself available, mentoring, counseling, advice, community service, things like that fall into this third bucket of making an impact. So I have the 3 buckets: make an impact, respect, and integrity/ethics. And then from that flows a hierarchy of
So you just went
sub-values.
through this process. Did you have something similar before? Because
I never did it before.
but I'm guessing they were probably all in the back of
They
your
were,
mind.
yeah. I mean, I sensed that that's who I was, but when I put pencil to paper and I created the hierarchy, it was interesting because there were some values that I put down that I thought I had, and I shared this with my wife, and she says, that's not you. That may be who you want to be, but it isn't what you demonstrate. And patience, for example, was one of the things that I thought that I was pretty patient, a good listener, somebody who thought things through methodically. But she said,
Just because maybe that wasn't a value, did you keep it on the list and it's something you're working
No,
towards?
I took it off.
You did.
No, I
take
took it off,
yeah.
and I work on it because I don't think that impatience is a good value, and so I just try to be more aware of it. I'm not succeeding at times, but at least I'm aware of it. But that's what I call gap assessment in values. What I have my students do is say who they are, do that values hierarchy today, and then as they think about leadership in a business world, who would they want to be? And that's aspirational. And what's the gap in your aspirational goals of what values you feel you should strive to have?
I love the fact that you do this because I would argue, even though we all go through, goal planning and things like that from a business perspective every year, I would argue there's probably less than 10% of people in business that go through a thoughtful process of really articulating what's their purpose in life, what their values are, and the things that are going to drive them on a day-to-day basis. Yet, those are the things that guide every single decision and every action that we have.
Totally. I have this view, and which is why I make this at the very beginning of my course, that when you're a leader and you engage in interactions with people, build teams, make decisions, drive culture of the organization, respond to crises, whatever, you don't want to sit down and then say, well, who am I?
Sure.
And how should I go about making this decision? You want to just go about making the decision. And you want to do that knowing that it's founded on a set of values that will serve you well over time. And so I tell everybody that, you may think it's a waste of your time right now to put this down on paper, but trust me, in a year from now or 2 years from now, 3 or 5 or 15, you're going to look back and I tell them you should even memorialize it and keep it on a little card if you could. I have not done that, honestly, but I'm every time I think about it, I should. What are your values? Keep it in your pocket and kind of remember this is who you are. And when you routinely do things that demonstrate that those values are you may not need that card, but I think by and large, it's a good thing to do.
So what's funny is on my iPhone, you know how you have that little notes thing?
Yeah.
I have my purpose and my values. I call it my center.
Yeah.
And I
Great
think about
idea.
all of the things. And everybody probably thinks, well, I know what my values are. They're just part of who I am. But what I find is that in a moment when things are busy, I don't forget, but I may not contemplate what those values are. And by looking at them literally every day, it reinforces the things that it reinforces who I want to be.
Yeah. You know what else it does, though, Mike? It allows others to see who they are dealing with. Because if you consistently demonstrate those values, people will see it, people will feel it, people will know it, and then they know how to react to you and how to deal with you when they're engaged in an interaction with you.
Absolutely.
Because they know that with me, my students know that timeliness is important. And they fret when they're late because they know that that's really important. It may not be important to them, but they know that when they're trying to deal with me in an interactively positive way, they're going to be timely.
Absolutely. Barry, did your style change kind of as you matured, or not even matured, but as you went into different roles? Like just thinking about Deloitte, running the Deloitte US member firm versus running Deloitte globally, two very different things. Did your style change much?
It has to.
Yep.
Right. The one thing that I never was a command and control kind of leader.
Yep.
If you said to me what type of leader, I was more a consensus builder, a collaborator. No question, I'm decisive. So it isn't about not being able to make a decision on my own, but it is about making sure that I have all of the input and good thoughts that others have for a particular subject, and then I'm prepared to make a decision.
Yep.
But the kind of leader that I felt that I was more of a collaborative, consensus-orientated person. But when I moved into the global role, I went from having complete line authority in the U.S. over every professional. So my job description under our partnership agreement, essentially, I was responsible for everything within the company.
Sure.
When I went globally, I was not responsible for everything in the company. I had very specific responsibilities and almost no line authority over any of the constituencies within the organization except for the actual professionals within DTTL. Mm-hmm. And so I went largely from a line authority to a role of influence. And so your leadership style, in order to be as effective, has to change.
Sure. You've been quoted as saying trust is like oxygen for a business. Hopefully I got that right. What do you mean by that?
You know, this goes back to values a little bit, but if you think about being respected and having credibility and being trusted, what allows for that? What allows for Mike to trust Barry? What causes you to trust me, not only as an individual, but as the CEO of the company? Well, it's my responsibility to demonstrate the trustworthiness. And if I can demonstrate the trustworthiness by being open, honest, transparent, vulnerable, I perform, I respect you, all the things that would cause you to want to trust me, then I think I can be trusted. That, to me, is the foundation of our future interactions and our ability to get things done, for me to lead, for you to follow, for you to have ideas, for me to adopt them. It's the oxygen of the organization.
As a CEO, you probably get a lot of, or you got a lot of input from people all across the organization. How did you know when to take the input and when not to take the input? And where would you go?
You never know for sure, Mike, because everyone in an organization like Deloitte, everyone has an opinion.
That's true. Yep.
And so if you were really aiming to be the most consummate consensus builder and collaborator, you'd get everyone's input. That becomes unwieldy. You just can't do that. You can't do that. And you certainly can't do that on every decision. And if you weight the decisions even, at best you can do it at the most significant decisions. You can't do it on every decision. And there are some decisions that, by the very nature of what you do, has to be held private. You can't discuss some of these things publicly, and therefore you can't get input on some of these things publicly because of the confidentiality and privacy requirements associated with it. But it's imprudent not to seek input from subject matter experts. So start with that. There's always going to be people who are smarter than you are, that have more information than you do on the subject, that are deep, knowledgeable individuals on the subject, and you should seek them out. When you believe in your good judgment as a leader, as an experienced professional, that you now have all the data that you believe you need in order to make the decision, you kind of have to stop the input gathering, the socialization process, et cetera. And that can only be determined judgmentally, case by case. I could tell you that it would be a big mistake if you just endlessly sought that additional input. When will you know you have enough?
Right.
You know, I'm not an auditor by background, but I used to do audits. How do you test for liabilities? You test for understatement of a liability.
You're going back a long time.
I'm going back a long, long time. And what I'm saying may not even be relevant today, but when it was relevant, you just never knew what the population of liabilities are.
You know what the challenge, though,
just keep on going.
in making these decisions, though, or in getting input is, like you said, everybody's got an opinion. And I think one of the things that I heard you say is you got to take into consideration what people say, look at the facts. But then I would imagine to a certain degree, it goes back to kind of comparing that or putting that up against your own value system and
Absolutely.
making a decision.
Yeah, you assess it.
Right.
Your responsibility as a decision maker is to assess the data, to assess the input, and then go forward with the decision.
Would you, and this may be a tricky question, but when you were looking at something, would you ever seek input outside of your executive team?
Oh, yeah.
Meaning, like, would you go, not around them necessarily, but go down to line partners or others to get feedback and input for something that you're looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be happy to go outside the firm, too.
Yep.
I do think that vigilant appraisal and getting confirmation from subject matter expertise outside your organization is a pretty smart thing to do, whether it's in developing strategy, competitive intelligence, or industry information, whatever the case may be. Getting somebody who's really an expert on it, I think is a smart thing to do. And within the firm, I think it's always a good idea to go to the people who are the deep leaders, knowledgeable, experienced, been there, done that. So, yeah, I would go into the organization if I felt that I needed to. There's a way to do it, though. You just don't do it. I often let the person know who was that person's boss and say, listen, I'm going to go see Mike, and I want to talk to Mike about building greenhouses. I told Mike's boss, and they're pretty cool with it. Sometimes if it's innocuous, you just go and you pick up the phone and you call. I don't see a problem with that, Mike. I think you have to tap into all the resources that are available to help you make the best decision you can. It's all about how you do it.
Barry, what about, you talked earlier a bit about the importance of diversity. And I was going to focus on boards and the importance of diversity on boards, but I think you teed it up earlier around just diversity in general. Can you kind of share your thoughts, whether it be specifically on the importance of having it within your executive team or in boards, or just even in a broader population?
I just think it's a business imperative. It's very simple as that, we can talk about the social good of having diversity, the implications on corporate responsibility, and it's what should be done. But I think at the end of the day, if you're a business leader, you really have to look at your business. And I am of the view that in almost any business environment today, it's a business imperative. It's a business imperative in attracting and retaining the very best and brightest. It's a business imperative in terms of competition. Mm-hmm. It's a business imperative in terms of customer orientation. I don't know the statistics now, but when I was at Deloitte, I recollect that a very high and growing percentage of RFPs included information requests on diversity and commitment, and the people that you were proposing to do work for themselves were becoming more and more diverse, and they wanted to see your commitment to that. I mean, it's a customer demand.
It's almost like, to me, this is like the no-brainer question.
To
it's
me,
like,
it is,
why,
but
yeah.
you can't underestimate, however, how many people still don't believe that.
Right.
And still don't believe the data that would suggest that companies that have diverse thinking, demonstrated by diversity of people and process and everything that goes along with it, outperform. The decisions are better, but people still don't believe it. There's still a lot of cynics that just believe companies are committed to diversity because it's the socially acceptable thing to do.
It's interesting. I got an email from somebody that listens to the podcast and said, Mike, you need to bring more women on the podcast.
Yeah,
and I wrote back to her, I said, I absolutely do. We just published a podcast where we interviewed the CRO at Target, and she's a woman. We've got another one planned for next week. But I couldn't agree more, especially because the perspectives, not only that women, but of all different backgrounds bring is so important.
I think it's rich.
Yep.
I think that it really does give food for thought that creates an outcome that would be better than not having that input from diverse perspectives. And by the way, today diversity is so much more than what diversity meant when I was a young professional. It isn't just gender, it isn't minority or ethnic diversity. It's sexual orientation, it's age, it's thought, it's new category, introvert versus extrovert. I mean, I can go on and on and on about the categories of diversity and how important it is to tap into high quality thinkers that are from a different kind of category, however you want to define it, as you are.
Absolutely. I mean, just because they provide, at the very least, they provide a different perspective that you may not have thought about. Yep. So are you an introvert or an extrovert?
You know what? I know you're not going to believe this, but I'm an introvert that's learned how to engage in an environment that values extroverts more. I know of a number of people who are introverts and cannot, migrate the environment as well as I was fortunate to be able to do. And so they remain introverts, and we do not tap into their quality of thinking because they have a lot to offer, but they're just not socially engaging.
So, Barry, you hired and you promoted a lot of people at Deloitte. Is there anything when you look back on your career that was indicative of success? Like when you would say, these are the attributes of, especially you probably promoted a lot of people, like here are the types of things that I would look for, and these were the indicators of success. What would they be?
That's a really, really tough question because there's so many attributes and that work at different times. My career spanned 38 years.
Right.
I would say, first off, the most successful people that you would hire are those that have cultural fit to the organization's values and culture.
That's why I remember going through the process when there were 6 firms, and there was one that did a much better job at the time recruiting, and I was within like inches of accepting, and then I finally stepped back and I said, but I feel most comfortable at Deloitte.
I really fit.
Right. And thank God I came here. Yeah.
And then you realize how important that is. And it's a two-way street, right? It's a two-way street. So I do think that ultimately, as you look back, the people that acculturate, the people that integrate, the people that become part of the fabric of the organization as quickly as possible are the ones ultimately that succeed. So cultural fit, value alignment would be number one. Number two would be, and I think that this is really important, folks that are independent, get things done kind of people, folks that don't have to wait to be told to do something, but appreciate, authority and appreciate governance and appreciate that there's always somebody that you report to or you're held accountable by. But I want a self-starter, and I think that the people that come in and, don't wait for an invitation are the people that ultimately do well.
So, Barry, let's go to, the fact is we hire a lot of very motivated, smart people at Deloitte that have all different personalities. Can you talk about, just in your experience, what is the best way to motivate? And I know it's obviously one size does not fit all, but if there's any perspectives that you have around motivating, especially some of our younger staff, you're now a professor, so you see what's important to younger people. What would you say some of the things we could do better to motivate them?
Well, first off, you can't ask people to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. So start off by leading by example. Motivation comes from watching others and seeing others succeed and doing the right thing and so forth. And so if I want to motivate you, Mike, to come up with an idea and to take the risk of innovating a new thing for the organization, I ought to behave in a way that gives you the motivation that's what you should do.
Right.
And I can give multiple examples
Sure.
of that. So lead by example would be one. Two, I think that empowerment is a big motivator. If you put too much of a leash on somebody, it really is demotivating. But I don't think you can give an unlimited empowerment to everybody on everything. And the way I look at it, and I also use this as an analogy in class, is a picture frame approach. Think about a 3x5 picture frame. small. Think about an 8x10 picture frame, bigger. And some areas, your picture frame is bordered by an 8x10, in which what I mean by that is those are the rules
that you have to play
by. And when you're inside the picture, you can do whatever you want. Now, so what would be a 3x5 would be compliance, for example, with continuing professional education.
Sure.
You don't have much choice, Mike. You got to meet your requirements, and you've got to do it within a certain time frame. So how you do it is limited. But if you were creating something like a greenhouse, I might say, okay, Mike, listen, here's your budget. Here's the time frame. It would be wide. It would be pretty limited in terms of restrictions, and now go do it and go figure it out yourself. I will tell you that when you're in that picture frame, the bigger the picture frame, the more empowering, the more motivating.
Absolutely. It's first of all, you're giving some really good analogies for this, but I have thought back as I asked that question on the people that I have really enjoyed working with, and the folks that I have enjoyed most is where they have given me the opportunity to be me, to do the things that I think make sense. But I also had this own governor that I would never go too far. Like I always knew when to kind of communicate with them or, phone home to say, hey, here's what I'm doing. Are you comfortable with that? Especially before big decisions were made. But it was so liberating to be empowered because it's so much more enjoyable.
But you see, empowerment doesn't mean a lack of accountability.
Absolutely.
And so if you take the view that empowerment really means empowerment, but you hold yourself accountable to somebody or some governance process, I think that's the greatest formula for motivation.
Absolutely.
So those are some of the things that I have for motivating.
What advice are you giving to the kids in your class that are looking to go out into the world?
So first off, you have to be yourself. So I talk about the importance of values. To go back to that, I can't emphasize that enough. The importance of values and demonstrating those values on a regular and consistent basis, really important. Second is you can't be someone else. So the moment you're hired for something and you start changing who you are, I think you're doomed for failure. So you got to be yourself, be natural, because you're hired because of who you are. And people that seek to change that, I don't think do very well.
I love the fact that you just said that, because I do see people coming into the firm and coming into other organizations where they feel like they need to fit a certain type of mold. And I think what makes Deloitte so great and organization so great is the diversity, going back to diversity, the diversity of people.
Yeah.
And when you can see people in their own element and who they are, first of all, it just makes it more enjoyable working with them. Yep. And I think they perform that much better.
No doubt about it. Let me just, to round it out, give one other advice that I typically give most of the students, and that is the importance of relationship building and the importance of leveraging those relationships and networks. But I give them a very, very, very direct message, and I say, the day that you need to tap into your relationship isn't the day that you create it, because it's not sincere enough.
Right.
It's not long enough or sustainable enough.
It's not a relationship.
It's not a relationship, and it's just a favor of somebody that you happen to know. And so you really have to build relationships early in your career of all kinds, of all sizes and shapes, so that when you need it, when you feel an opportunity to tap into it, you can do it with credibility and likelihood of reaction. So we talk about that, and particularly when you go into business school, one of the values of a business school education is the ridiculously fantastic sets of relationships you could make, either with the other students, with the professors, or in the case of New York City, where Columbia, which is where I teach, has a presence that can connect and integrate business leadership in the most significant, city in the world for business, to meet those people and develop relationships with them.
Let me ask you a question, because I think sometimes people get caught up in developing relationships and may not do it in the most authentic way. What is one or two things that you would say people can do to create authentic relationships?
So relationships are a two-way street. You got to give as you're going to get. And so my view of a relationship is to nurture, to be giving, to listen, to advise, to be there when they need you. Some people I know of a senior partner that once retired from Deloitte. I mean, he's got a list of people that he just knows that when he's on the road, he's going to pick up the phone and call. Mm-hmm. We all have downtime.
Right.
I mean, we're not very good at managing that downtime, but if you're sitting waiting for an airplane, for example, why not pick up the phone and give a call to somebody who's on your relationship nurturing list?
Yep.
and just touch base with them. So it's interaction, regular interaction, but you got to give in order to get.
So Bear, how did you get or where did your passion come from for education? So I think about DU, I think of New Profit, College Summit. Now you're a professor, and you didn't take the traditional path that many retired partners go down, which is how many boards can I get on? So why education?
I just go back to the beginning when you asked me questions about who I was and where I grew up and so forth. I recognized that if it wasn't for the insights and vision of my now wife and her parents, the probability of me pursuing a college education and getting a degree in an area that could ultimately create a career for me would have been pretty low. And I realized without that kind of advice and leadership by somebody, really high potential people may not get there.
So the title of this podcast is Resilient. And I'm always interested in kind of what makes a resilient leader. Because we're all going to be knocked on our butt at some point in time. We're all going to go through financial crises like you did. We're all going to have those challenging times. What are some of the characteristics when you think of a resilient leader? What are those characteristics?
Courage, tenacity, boldness, self-starters, committed, don't give up easily, balanced, tempered. You can't let emotions get the better part of you in a situation requiring resilience. So typically it's people who are balanced and methodical, and that's what sort of comes to mind. And so if you think about resilience, it's about how you react to things and how you take a bad situation and make it good. Or at least mitigate the downside of a bad situation and appreciate that's what you're doing. So that's what comes to my mind.
When I just think about the conversation and while we didn't talk specifically about resilience, I just think about all those challenging times that you went through and the things that you did to lead this organization to greater places. So, I want to really thank you we spent a lot of time today. So I thank you for your time, first of all. And I want to acknowledge you. I mean, one of the things that I was excited about this interview is I've always looked up to you, as I indicated at the beginning, as a great leader. But probably what's meant a lot more to me is the mentorship. I could tell everybody out there that, Barry has given me advice and guidance. Hopefully it's helped me out in my career a little. And then also the friendship. I mean, for you to come into New York, you to spend a couple hours meeting with us, that means the world to me. So thank you.
It's quite my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Resilient, a Deloitte podcast produced by our friends at Rivet Radio. You can hear us by going to Deloitte.com or visiting your favorite podcatcher, keyword resilient. Also, several of you have already hit me up on LinkedIn and keep it coming. Provide me with any comments that you have, any guests that you would recommend. It truly is inspiring me and giving me great ideas for how we could continue to make this podcast great. My profile is under Michael Kearney. Last name is spelled Kearney. And remember, leaders who embrace risk improve performance and are more prepared to lead confidently in the volatile world we live in.